Hello, in this video I want to talk about triggers. So I'm going to discuss what a trigger is, why you might be experiencing them, what a trigger looks like or feels like, and how it affects you over a long time or the longer term effects of a trigger. And finally, at the end, I'll give you some tips on how to deal with them and how to save your sanity. Hello and welcome to the Divorce Sanctuary. My name's Elizabeth Goddard. On this channel I talk about healing from emotional abuse and divorcing emotionally as well as physically from the abuser. And it's really important. The emotional divorce means they no longer have control and power over you, and they cannot trigger you or affect your emotions in any way. If you're new to the channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're returning, welcome back and thank you. So in this video, I want to look at triggers and emotional flashbacks. And triggers will come up in different forms. So one person might be triggered by reading something, another might watch something on the television or see a film and their fears are triggered. It could be a newspaper article that reminds them of an experience. It might be raised voices, loud noises. It could even be a date on the calendar. It might be a smell. It might be a place or a memory of a place that the trauma happened. It might be a lookalike person. They catch up the corner of their eye someone that's caused trauma to them. A trigger is an event. It could be a smell or a sound or anything that creates a flashback to a traumatic experience. Feeling triggered isn't about feeling uncomfortable. It's like re-experiencing the trauma all over again. It's something that prompts an increase in or the return of certain symptoms. If you've experienced any form of abuse or trauma, it sets off a chemical reaction within your body. This reaction is a survival mechanism that runs in the subconscious level, alerting you to danger. It records a snapshot of a moment and it files it away to use at a later date. These memories can be helpful in some situations, but they can hinder us in others. In an environment where you might be required to make big decisions, you might find you can't. You might have stored a survival mechanism that prevents you from taking action through fear. I worked with someone about 7 years ago and he was setting up a new venture and he had this crippling anxiety about it. When we delved deeper, his family had had a business when he was younger and it collapsed and it left the family with nothing. And it was this fear that was coming up and preventing him taking steps that he needed to move forward. So doing some work with him and his partner, we were able to shift his subconscious beliefs and he was able to move on and create an amazing company. So when you've experienced something physical, it can also lodge somewhere in your body, and it's the same for words. Your trigger might be a smell, and this works in both positive and negative senses. So people doing marketing for selling homes discovered that a higher rate of sales were made when people smelt freshly made bread. In the negative, you might smell something like a perfume or an aftershave and it reminds you of a person. A trigger might be an action or a movement. Recently I went to the dentist, and as I turned round, a dental nurse was holding up a temperature gun to my head. I froze. When I was 18 years old, I was caught up in a robbery of a store, and I flashed back to then. Abuse works in the same way. Your mind created a memory and associated emotions and feelings, sights and sounds. So unhealed, these sit much like a verruca, which is a virus, and it sits and lays dormant waiting to be triggered again if you don't remove it or you don't get the full root out. The trigger emotes emotional flashbacks, so which are sudden and overwhelming feelings triggering your survival instincts. These emotions can include fear, shame, alienation, rage, grief, depression. Emotional flashbacks can range from very subtle to horrific, and they also vary in duration from moments to weeks. This affects you over time, and there are long-term effects. Living in this state is like being on hyper alert all the time. You unwittingly went into a war zone, and you might be looking over your shoulder constantly. Your stress hormones are sky high. A trigger will take you into a stress response of fight, flight, fawn, freeze, and you might find yourself reacting totally out of character. Fight and flight are stress responses. So when you're faced with a dangerous situation, you make an instant decision. You either stay and fight, or you run and take flight. So our brains are making split decisions by scanning the area and deciding if we've got enough energy to get away and safely, or whether we need to stay and fight. And adrenaline is released into the body. Fawning is a response where a person perceives a threat, but instead of running away or fighting, they respond in a pleasing way. This technique is used to try and calm down a situation. It's to stall the threat of the attacker. Talking your way out of a situation, or displaying exaggerated flattery or affection towards the abuser. And the freeze response is triggered when a person can't win. They can't fight, they can't take flight, and they can't calm down the situation. Animals use freeze by playing dead. And my experience of freeze was my chin tilted to the left and I was paralysed temporarily. My body froze, but my brain was still working. It was trying to understand what was happening and why I couldn't move. Stress can be helpful, it can be healthy, it keeps us focused and it keeps us alert. But when it's experienced over a long period of time, it's very harmful. A lot of people coming out of emotionally abusive relationships suffer with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and CPTSD is that PTSD is one event that triggers the stress hormones, triggers the reaction of the stress, the trauma. But with complex, it's a series of events, it's a series of traumas, it's continual barrage, feeling under threat. So you might jump at the slightest sound or movement as your body and mind believe that you're under attack. There are also long-term effects on your body. It affects your immune system. There's a constant flow of hormones, stress hormones surging through your body, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And think of the pressure on your kidneys. This is where they're released from. Your body is prepared constantly to fight or take flight, to fawn, to calm down a situation, or to go into freeze. A soldier in a war zone gets rest days. A runner takes time in their day to repair their muscles. An experienced negotiator has time between meetings to de-stress and prepare for the next one. Triggers can actually be useful. And that might sound a bit scary, but I do hear a lot of people say it's a triggering statement. But I see these as indications of healing or what needs to be healed. Years ago, I had an unneutered cat who would come into the house and spray, leaving a disgusting smell. And we couldn't catch him, although his mother was domesticated. He was nearly feral. We also had a dog at the same time, and he would wander around the room sniffing out the offending areas, and I was able to follow him around and clear up. The trauma is the offending cat spray. The dog is the trigger highlighting the smell. Your body is constantly on alert, but it also affects your mind, and it can cause a lot of damage there as well. The hippocampus hibernates. It recognises trauma and it closes down to protect itself. Long-term contact with a toxic or emotionally abusive person causes damage to the brain. Abuse causes damage to the hippocampus, which is a structure that's either side of the head. They're in the shape of seahorses. They're situated just where your ears are. And it's an area that we use for learning and memory. So damage to the hippocampus results in memory loss. And the stress caused by an emotionally abusive relationship triggers the hormones cortisol, adrenaline and noradrenaline. And this causes the hippocampus to shrink. And it can happen with children and adults when they're under constant threat from intimidation or bullying behaviour. This could be the fear of abandonment or destruction of a favourite object or toy. Damage to the hippocampus can happen when a child or an adult experiences criticism, belittling, name-calling, yelling, swearing, verbal humiliation. It can occur when children and adults are isolated from friends and family, not allowing them to have friends or preventing them from attending groups or classes outside the home. Research from Yale and Stanford University using veterans and victims of childhood abuse that known to be suffering from PTSD used MRI scans to show the reduction in the hippocampus. And these studies showed that traumatic or highly stressful experiences can have long-term effects on the structure and function of the brain. I believe triggers can be helpful indicators on what needs healing and how far you've come on your healing journey. The aim is to reduce the emotional flashbacks and to eventually not be triggered. And that's what emotional divorce is. And then if you're going through the divorce process itself with the abuser, it starts all over again. Their beautifully crafted email was designed to trigger you. So I have some tips on dealing with triggers. So the first one is going no contact or grey rock. So one of the reasons it's so important is that it helps you start to repair the damage caused by the relationship and by the abuser. When you're still in contact with them, you're still on alert. Your body needs time to detach from them and to start healing the damage that they've caused. Number 2 would be create a safe space in your home. So it could be a bath or it could be the corner of a room. This is to help your mind and your body associate with being safe. And it will start to release some of the hormones that are raging around your body. It starts to reduce the stress hormones and it starts to relax your nervous system. And number 3 is when you experience emotional response, try and talk to it. As your body starts to calm down from the hormones, see if you can check in with who it was or what it was. Was it a smell or was it a word? If it feels safe, name the emotions. What were coming up for you? Was it fear, abandonment, shame, guilt? Check in and see whether there's a child that was responding, whether you could feel an age that you were when this happened to you initially. And this indicates that there's an original wound, a wound beyond what's happened to you in this relationship. Number 4 is reprogram your self-talk. Remind yourself what reality is when those emotions start to creep in. Perhaps you hear a voice or words and they're not yours, they're somebody else's. You might have heard belittling statements as a child or even as an adult. Do you agree with the statements and whose voice is saying them? Use grounding exercises and breathing exercises to help you when you're experiencing these emotions. It will help you control your thoughts and slow down and even stop the rumination that can take place. So as you start to look for the proof that this is all your fault, there was something wrong with you. As your mind slows down, you're able to realise that what took place was abuse. And then you start to be able to calm down the emotions and then merge them. It helps for you to take control of the chemicals. It slows down the release of the stress hormones and your body and mind recognise the trigger wasn't a real event. A trigger can be anything that brings up a memory, a smell, a sight, a sound. A trigger could also be hearing a name, getting a text message, an email. And when you're in that trauma-based response, it sends your body into fight, flight, fawn, freeze. You might experience emotions of fear, shame, or guilt. Memories come up for you which trigger emotional flashbacks. It's really important to be aware of them and to find ways of dealing with them and helping your body and your mind relax. It's really important to divorce emotionally from the abuser. And you know you've done this, that it's complete when you no longer feel anything. Emotionally divorcing means that during the divorce process, that perfectly timed or perfectly designed email or court documents that were created to trigger you have no effect. The abuser wants you to react. This is part of the game. They want you to prove to everybody that you are the crazy one and it's not them. If you'd like to find out more ways of working with me, I'll put the link to my website below, along with both my links to my books, Finding Lily and the A to Z of Emotional Abuse. I have 2 free workbooks, which are Turn Broken into Your Superpower and Self-Care is Vital. I'll put those links below, along with the meditation that I've got on grieving the past, the present and the future. I hope you found this useful. It is a horrible experience. Triggers are designed to hurt you. They are also there to help you understand what still needs healing. And you can measure them by the amount of pain you're in. Emotional flashbacks and triggers can last for weeks and months. And it's so important if you can use some grounding and breathing exercises to initially kickstart your journey to healing. Sending you loads and loads and loads of love.